January wind cut through the Grace Community Church parking lot like a blade fresh off the grinder. Tom Whitaker sat in his diesel truck, engine idling rough, breath fogging the windshield. The cold made the tools in his truck bed ring like dull bells every time the wind gusted. His hands, scarred from 40 years working metal, permanently stained with oil no soap could reach, gripped the steering wheel while he watched through the frosted glass. Diane stood beside a silver Lexus, his wife. 40 years of marriage, and she wouldn't even ride to church with him anymore, said he embarrassed her, smelling like motor oil. The man beside her, Rick something, her business partner, was laughing. So was Diane. An elderly woman stood between them, elegant but confused, holding papers that flapped in the wind. She was trying to read their lips. Diane leaned close, speaking slow and loud like the woman was stupid. "Maybe if you could hear, Eleanor, you'd understand business," Rick added, grinning. "We need an answer today. Can you comprehend that?" The old woman's hands moved, signing, desperate, beautiful. Nobody else saw it, but Tom did, ASL. Learned it 30 years back for a deaf Korean war vet at the machine shop. The woman's hand said, "Help, they're lying." Tom's chest went tight, not with fear, with something older, something his father had taught him about what a man does when he sees cruelty. He opened the truck door. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of road salt and diesel exhaust. The woman looked up, saw him. Her eyes, bright, intelligent, terrified, met his. Tom's hands moved before he thought about it. "Are you hurt?" Her face transformed. Shock, hope, relief. Diane and Rick didn't even notice. They were already climbing into the Lexus, still laughing. The woman stumbled as they drove off, dropping something. Her wallet hit the frozen gravel. Tom crossed the parking lot, boots crunching ice, picked it up, opened it. The ID said, Eleanor Hayes, Hayes Industrial Group. He knew that name. Everybody did. $900 million. And inside the wallet, a military medal. A photo of a young soldier, handsome, making sign language shapes at the camera. Tom looked up. The Lexus was gone. Diane was gone. The old woman, Eleanor, stood alone in the wind, watching him with an expression he couldn't read. This was where everything changed. The workshop smelled like it always did. Motor oil, sawdust, coffee burning on the hot plate in the corner. Tom had the Widow Miller's tractor up on blocks, transmission spread across his workbench like a puzzle only he knew how to solve. His hands moved automatic, muscle memory from 4 decades of fixing things other people said were too far gone. The space heater hummed in the corner, barely making a dent in the January cold. Tom's breath still made little clouds when he exhaled, but his hands stayed steady. That's what mattered. "There's your problem," he muttered, holding up a worn gear to the light. Metal shavings glittered on his palm. 50,000 miles past dead. He had a replacement in the parts drawer, cleaned it, fitted it, torqued it down to spec. The transmission slid back together like it was grateful for the attention. The bay door rattled. Diane stood there in her church clothes, navy dress, pearls Tom didn't remember buying, that smile she wore for clients. Not for him, never for him anymore. "You're not wearing that to the potluck." Her nose wrinkled like the workshop smelled bad, like he smelled bad. Tom looked down at his coveralls, oil-stained, sure, worn thin at the knees, but clean enough. "Just need 10 minutes to shower." "Tom," she said his name like it cost her something. "I can't keep showing up with you looking like you just crawled out from under a car." "I did crawl out from under a tractor, Diane. Mrs. Miller doesn't pay you." "She's a widow. Her furnace died last month, too. You want me to charge her?" Diane's jaw tightened. That look she got lately, like she was doing math in her head, and he kept coming up short. "I'm leaving now," she said. "I'll meet you there. Try not to be late." She was gone before he could answer. Her car, new, leased, something German he couldn't pronounce, started smooth and purred out of the driveway. Tom stood there in the cold, listening to the engine fade. The space heater clicked off. The workshop went silent except for the wind outside. He looked at the tractor. Fixed. Running. Useful. Then he looked at his hands. Grease under the nails, calluses thick as leather, the same hands that had held Diane on their wedding day, 1983, both of them young and stupid and sure of everything. He washed up at the utility sink, soap cold enough to sting, changed into his church clothes, khakis, flannel shirt, the jacket Diane said made him look like a farmer. He was a machinist, but she said it was the same difference. Both embarrassing. The diesel truck took 3 tries to start. Tom let it warm up, listening to the engine knock and settle. Reliable. That's what mattered. You could count on a good engine. He drove to Grace Community alone. heater blowing cold air that wouldn't warm up until he was already there. Tom pulled into the church lot 20 minutes early. Old habit. His father used to say, early is on time is late, and late is disrespectful. The lot was mostly empty, just a few cars, Diane's German thing parked near the door, and next to it, a silver Lexus Tom didn't recognize. He parked in his usual spot, far corner under the oak tree. The truck shuddered and died. He sat there a minute, letting the silence settle, watching his breath fog the windshield. That's when he saw them. Diane and a man, younger than Tom, maybe mid-40s, wearing a coat that probably cost more than the truck. They stood close, too close, talking to an elderly woman Tom didn't know. The woman looked lost. Elegant, silver hair pulled back, but confused. She held papers that flapped in the wind, kept trying to read their lips. Tom cracked the window. Cold air knifed in, but he could hear voices now. Simple investment opportunity, the man was saying. Rick. Tom remembered now, Rick something. Diane's business partner, she'd mentioned. At dinner once. Maybe twice. Financial advisor, developer, one of those. We just need your signature today, Diane added, pointing at the papers. Before the property goes to auction. The old woman's face creased with worry. Her hands moved, quick, graceful, desperate. Tom's chest went tight, sign language. I don't understand, the woman said, her voice careful, the way deaf people talk when they've learned to speak but can't hear themselves. You said this was a donation. Now you're saying investment. Rick laughed, not kind. Maybe if you could hear properly, Eleanor, you'd understand how business works. Diane giggled, actually giggled. The woman, Eleanor, stepped back like she'd been slapped. Her hands moved again. Help, they're lying to me. Tom's door opened before he thought about it. His boots hit frozen gravel, the crunch loud in the empty lot. He crossed the distance, hands already forming shapes he hadn't used in years. Are you hurt? He signed. Eleanor's eyes went wide. Her hands flew. You know ASL? Yes. What do they want? But Diane had seen him now. Her face shifted. Surprise, then irritation, then that fake smile she used on difficult clients. Tom, you're early. She touched Rick's arm, possessive. This is Rick Brennan. Rick, my husband Tom. Rick's handshake was firm, calculated. Heard a lot about you. Diane says you're handy with engines. Among other things, Tom said quietly. He looked at Eleanor. Ma'am, are you all right? She's fine, Rick said, smooth as oil. Just a little confusion about some paperwork, property investment, complicated stuff. We're helping her navigate it. Tom signed to Eleanor. Do you want help? Her hands trembled. Yes, but they say the deadline is today. I don't know what to do. We really need to finalize this, Rick said, checking his watch. The auction window closes at 3. Eleanor, if you could just sign here. What property? Tom asked. Rick's smile tightened. That's really between Eleanor and us. Client confidentiality. If it's confidential, why are you discussing it in a church parking lot? Diane's hand clamped on Tom's arm. Her nails dug in through his jacket. Tom, we're handling this. Why don't you go inside? I'll be there in a minute. Tom looked at her, really looked. When had her eyes gotten so cold? I was just asking. Go. Inside. Each word separate. Sharp. Eleanor's hands moved. Thank you for trying. Rick was already guiding her toward the Lexus, one hand on her elbow. We'll find somewhere quiet to finish this. Maybe Mabel's Diner. You like pie, Eleanor? They loaded her into the passenger seat. Rick climbed in, engine purring to life. The Lexus backed up fast, gravel spraying, and that's when Eleanor's wallet fell. Tom saw it hit the ground, black leather stark against frozen gray. The Lexus was already pulling onto the main road. He bent down, picked it up, opened it. Driver's license. Eleanor Hayes. Age 76. Address in the nice part of town, the part where the houses had gates. Business card. Hayes Industrial Group, CEO. Tom knew that name. Anybody who read the business section knew it. Manufacturing. Defense contracts. The kind of money that had commas in it you couldn't count on both hands. And tucked behind the license, a military medal, silver star, and a photo, old, creased, of a young soldier in uniform, maybe 19, grinning at the camera. His hands were signing something, the same shapes Eleanor had used. Tom's thumb brushed the photo. The kid had her eyes. He looked up. The Lexus was gone. Diane was walking toward the church, heels clicking on the sidewalk. She didn't look back. Tom stood there in the cold, wind howling through the empty lot, wallet heavy in his hand. He could hear Rick's voice in his head. Property investment, deadline today, 60-day window. And Diane, workshop property, his workshop, the one his father built in 1968, the one Tom had learned his trade in, had taught himself to fix anything that moved or burned or turned. The one Diane had been asking him about lately, zoning, permits, whether it was in his name or both their names. Tom closed the wallet, slid it into his jacket pocket. Inside the church, the organ started playing, time for service. But Tom stayed in the parking lot, breath fogging the air, one hand on the wallet that was worth $900 million, the other hand forming shapes his father had never taught him. Shapes that meant trouble, coming, fast. The Hayes estate had gates, actual iron gates with an intercom system and cameras that probably cost more than Tom's truck was worth. He sat there for 5 minutes, engine idling, before he pressed the button. A woman's voice crackled through. Yes? I'm here to see Eleanor Hayes. I have something of hers. Silence. Then, your name? Tom Whitaker. She dropped her wallet at Grace Community Church yesterday. More silence. Tom was about to give up when the gates swung open, smooth and quiet as money. The driveway curved through trees, still bare from winter, past gardens covered in burlap for the cold. The house, mansion really, was old stone, the kind that looked like it had stood there since before Tom was born and would stand there long after he was gone. A young woman met him at the door, late 20s, professional, hearing aid visible in her left ear. Mr. Whitaker, I'm Elena, Mrs. Hayes' assistant. Please, come in. The entryway smelled like furniture polish and old money. Tom wiped his boots 3 times on the mat, feeling oil-stained and out of place. Eleanor appeared at the top of the stairs, moving slow but steady. She smiled when she saw him, hands already signing, "You came." "I had your wallet," Tom signed back. "Thought you might need it." She descended, one hand on the railing. Up close, in better light, he could see the sharpness in her eyes. Nothing confused about them now. "Please," she said, gesturing toward a sunroom off the main hall. "Tea?" Tom started to refuse, then caught himself. She wanted to talk, and he had questions. The sunroom was warm, windows facing south, catching what little January sun broke through the clouds. Eleanor poured from a silver service that probably had a pedigree. Tom took the cup carefully, afraid his rough hands might chip the delicate china. "You learned sign language," Eleanor said, watching him with those sharp eyes. "Not many people do." Had a friend at the shop. Korean War vet. Lost his hearing from artillery fire. Name was James Park. Worked together for 10 years before he passed. Seemed only right to learn his language. Eleanor's hands went still around her cup. "James." "Yes, ma'am." She set down the tea, reached for a photo on the side table. The same one from her wallet, the young soldier, grinning, signing. "My son," she said quietly. "James Hayes, deaf since birth, killed in Korea, 1952. He was 19. Tom looked at the photo. The boy had her eyes, and her hands, graceful, expressive, alive, even in a still image. "I'm sorry," Tom said, because there wasn't anything else to say that mattered. Eleanor nodded, setting the photo back carefully. "Your friend, the veteran, what happened to him?" "Heart attack, 1995, died at his workbench, wrench still in his hand. Way he would have wanted it, I think." "You were kind to him." "He was my friend." Eleanor smiled, sad but genuine. Most people just smiled and nodded at my son, pretended they understood. "You're the first person in 30 years who's actually signed to me like I'm a complete human being." Tom felt something uncomfortable in his chest. "That's a low bar, ma'am." "Eleanor, please." She refilled his cup without asking, the gesture somehow maternal. "And yes, it's a very low bar, which is why I noticed immediately when your wife and Rick Brennan tried to exploit it." Tom set down his cup. "About that, Diane Whitaker, your wife, yes?" "For 40 years. "And Rick Brennan, her business partner?" Tom's jaw tightened. "So she says." Eleanor's expression shifted, something almost like pity crossing her face. "Mr. Whitaker, Tom, I need to ask you something direct. Did you know about the property scheme?" "What scheme?" She stood, moved to a desk in the corner, pulled out a manila folder, opened it. Inside were papers, contracts, forms, legal documents Tom would need a lawyer to parse. But he recognized one thing immediately. Whitaker Workshop, LLC. Eleanor pointed to a line near the bottom. Listed as collateral for a development loan, $200,000, signed by Diane Whitaker, Co-owner. Tom's blood went cold. I never signed that. I suspected as much. Eleanor flipped to another page. This is the contract Rick Brennan presented to me. Investment opportunity in a new commercial development, 50 acres, mixed use, projected returns of 18%. And if the primary investors, that's your wife and Rick, default, I absorb the collateral, including your workshop. That's... Tom couldn't finish. The room felt too small, too warm. Fraud, Eleanor said calmly. That's the word you're looking for. Tom stood, paced to the window. Outside, snow was starting to fall, light, lazy flakes that wouldn't stick. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass. Why are you telling me this? Because yesterday, you were the only person who treated me like a human being instead of a mark. Eleanor's voice was quiet, but firm. And because I suspect you're as much a victim here as I am. Tom turned. You didn't sign their papers. No. But they think you will. Eleanor's smile was sharp. They're very persistent. Rick has called 3 times since yesterday. Your wife twice. What did you tell them? That I was thinking about it. Eleanor moved closer, her perfume faint, lavender, old-fashioned. Tom, I wasn't confused yesterday. I was testing them. Testing. I read lips. I've done it for 70 years. I heard every word they said when they thought I couldn't understand. Her hands moved as she spoke, emphasizing. I know exactly what they're planning. The question is, do you? Tom sank back into his chair. 40 years of marriage, and Diane had forged his signature, had used their home, his father's workshop, as leverage in some scheme with a man Tom barely knew. How long? His voice came out rough. How long has she been planning this? Based on the paperwork? At least 6 months. Eleanor sat across from him, leaning forward. But Tom, there's something else you need to know. Eleanor pulled out another document. This one looked official, county seal at the top. Notice of non-conforming use, she read. Whitaker Workshop, 47 Oak Street, zoned residential. Commercial activity in violation as of January 15, 2025. Owner has 60 days to cease operations or apply for variance. Tom stared. My workshop's been there since '68. It's grandfathered. Was grandfathered. Someone filed a complaint with the county. Anonymous. Eleanor's eyes met his. The complaint was filed January 3rd, 3 days before Rick approached me with his investment opportunity. 3 days before your wife called me saying she had a business proposal involving property development. The pieces clicked together like gears in a transmission, slow, then all at once. They need my workshop shut down, Tom said slowly, so they can claim the property's not generating income, so they can force a sale, either to satisfy the investment loan they're trying to saddle me with, or through divorce proceedings if you refuse to cooperate. Eleanor leaned back. It's actually quite elegant, in a sociopathic sort of way. Tom felt dizzy. The room tilted. Diane wouldn't... We've been married 40 years. She wouldn't destroy... Wouldn't she? Eleanor's voice was gentle, but firm. Tom, when was the last time your wife treated you with respect? He opened his mouth, closed it, couldn't remember. I'm sorry, Eleanor said. I know this is difficult, but you need to understand what you're facing. In 60 days, if you haven't secured that variance, the county can force you to cease operations. And if you cease operations, Diane can claim the property is worthless, petition for sale in divorce court, and split the proceeds with Rick. Meanwhile, I either invest in their fraudulent development scheme, or they use my refusal as an excuse to default on other obligations and file bankruptcy. Either way, they win. Tom's hands formed fists, his father's workshop, the place where he'd learned everything that mattered, the place where he still felt useful, still felt like himself. Can we stop them? That depends. On what? Eleanor's expression shifted. Something Tom couldn't quite read. Calculation, maybe, or testing. On whether you're willing to trust me, she said carefully. Because I need to be honest with you about something. Tom waited. I wasn't just testing them yesterday. I was testing you. Me? Eleanor nodded. When you approached, when you signed to me, I had already researched you, Tom. I knew who you were. I knew about your wife's real estate business, about the workshop, about the zoning complaint that hadn't been filed yet but was about to be. Tom stared. How? Because Rick Brennan contacted me 3 weeks ago, before the church, before any of this. Eleanor's hands moved, precise, apologetic. I'm not a confused old woman, Tom. I built a $900 million company from nothing. I know a con when I see one. And I've been watching Rick and Diane very carefully. The betrayal hit different coming from Eleanor. Not as deep as Diane's, but sharp. So yesterday was theater. Yesterday was documentation. I needed to see how they'd behave when they thought they had me cornered. I needed witnesses. Eleanor met his eyes. And I needed to know if there was anyone in your wife's life who might still have a conscience. Someone who might help an old woman being exploited. The wallet, Tom said slowly. You dropped it on purpose. I did. And if I hadn't picked it up, if I just walked away. Eleanor's smile was sad. Then I would have handled this alone. But you didn't walk away, Tom. You helped, even though it might have cost you. Even though your wife was right there, disapproving. She paused. That tells me something about your character. And right now, character is the only thing I can trust. Tom sat back, head spinning. The snow outside was falling harder now, coating the bare tree branches in white. So what happens now? He asked. Now? Eleanor pulled out her phone, tapped a few times, showed him the screen. Now you need to see this. It was a calendar, January 15th, circled in red, and next to it, in neat handwriting, 60-day deed transfer deadline. Rick files foreclosure if no signature. They gave themselves a deadline, Eleanor said. March 15th. If I haven't invested by then, they'll move forward with the workshop foreclosure as Plan B. And if you fight them, Diane will file for divorce, claim your hiding assets, and drag you through court until you're too broke to keep fighting. Tom looked at the date. 60 days, 2 months. Can we beat them? Eleanor's expression hardened. Something fierce and sharp underneath the grandmotherly exterior. Tom, I've spent 50 years in boardrooms with men who thought they could cheat me because I couldn't hear them plotting. I've documented every conversation, every contract, every lie. She leaned forward. Yes, we can beat them, but it's going to take precision, patience, and you're going to have to trust me, even though I deceived you. Tom thought about his father, about James Park, the deaf vet who'd taught him that real communication wasn't about hearing words, it was about seeing people. He looked at Eleanor, really looked, saw the steel beneath the elegance, saw someone who'd survived her son's death and built an empire and still had time to test whether a stranger would show her basic human kindness. Okay, he said. What do we do? Eleanor smiled. First, you go home, act normal, don't let Diane suspect anything. She handed him a business card. My lawyer, call him tomorrow, tell him I sent you. He'll start working on the variance paperwork, quietly. And you? I'm going to keep documenting every phone call, every meeting, every lie. She stood, offered her hand. We have 60 days, Tom. Let's make them count. Tom shook her hand. Her grip was firm, sure. Why are you doing this? You could just walk away, report them to the police. Eleanor's eyes went distant. Because my son used to sign to me. Silence isn't surrender. He refused to be invisible just because the world wouldn't learn his language. She focused back on Tom. And I'll be damned if I let people like Rick and Diane turn silence into a weapon. Tom nodded. Outside, the snow was really coming down now. He drove home slowly, Eleanor's words echoing in his head. 60 days, March 15th. Silence isn't surrender. When he pulled into his driveway, Diane's car was already there. Lights on in the kitchen. Normal. Everything normal. Except nothing would ever be normal again. Mabel's diner smelled like burnt coffee and bacon grease, the way it had since Tom was a kid. Red vinyl booths, cracked but clean. Pie case rotating by the register. Mabel herself behind the counter, gray hair in a bun, reading glasses on a chain. Tom sat in the back booth, the one nobody used unless the place was packed. Tuesday morning, 10 a.m., it was just him and 2 farmers arguing about seed prices 3 booths over. His coffee had gone cold. He hadn't touched it. The bell over the door chimed. Pastor Frank Holloway stepped in, stamping snow off his boots. 68 years old, built like he'd done manual labor before he found his calling. He spotted Tom, nodded to Mabel, made his way over. Mind if I sit? Tom gestured to the opposite bench. Frank slid in, waved off Mabel's approach. Just coffee, Mabel. Thanks. They sat quiet while Mabel poured. She left the pot, knowing they wanted privacy. Folks are talking, Frank said finally. They always are. About you and Diane. Frank added cream to his coffee, stirred slow. About that man she's been spending time with, Rick. Tom's jaw tightened. Business partner. Business partners don't hold hands in booths at 2 in the afternoon. Frank's voice was gentle but firm. Mabel mentioned it, didn't want to gossip, but she thought you should know. The coffee tasted like metal. Tom set it down. How long? 6 months, maybe, since summer. Frank met his eyes. I'm sorry, Tom. Tom looked out the window. Snow falling steady now, covering everything in white, clean, like you could forget what was underneath. There's more, he said quietly. The workshop. They're trying to take it. Frank leaned forward. Who is? Tom told him. Not everything. Not Eleanor's plan, not the testing, but enough. The zoning complaint, the 60-day deadline, the forged documents using his property as collateral. Frank's face darkened. That's fraud, Tom. Criminal. Proving it's the hard part. Maybe not as hard as you think. Frank pulled out his phone, scrolled through something. Week before Christmas, Diane came to me, said Eleanor Hayes had donated $50,000 to the church building fund, wanted me to announce it at the Sunday service, make a big show of gratitude. Eleanor donated? That's what Diane claimed, had paperwork and everything. Looked official. Frank's expression was grim. But when I called Eleanor's office to send a thank you note, her assistant said they had no record of any donation, said Mrs. Hayes hadn't been approached about church funding at all. Tom felt something cold settle in his stomach. You think Diane forged it? I think Diane wanted to create a connection, make it look like Eleanor was already invested in the community, already working with her, build credibility for whatever scheme she and Rick were planning. Frank set down his phone. I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure, and because calling out a parishioner for fraud is, well, it's complicated. But now you're sure. Now I'm sure. Frank's voice was quiet but hard. I compared the signature on the donation form to Eleanor's actual signature from public documents. It's close, Tom, real close, but it's not right. The H is different, like someone practiced but couldn't quite get it perfect. Tom rubbed his face, exhaustion pulling at him. They've been planning this for months. Looks that way. And they're using the workshop, using my father's. His voice cracked. He stopped, swallowed hard. Frank reached across the table, gripped at Tom's shoulder. We're going to stop them. How? The variance hearing is in 58 days. If I don't get that permit... Your workshop's been there since 1968. It's grandfathered in 9 ways from Sunday. The only reason you're in trouble is because someone filed a complaint. Frank pulled out a small notebook, flipped pages. I made some calls. To the county zoning office. Turns out the complaint was filed anonymously, but the paperwork referenced specific code violations. Technical stuff. The kind of thing you'd only know if you'd researched it careful. Or if you were a real estate agent. Or that. Frank tapped the notebook. Here's the thing, Tom. The county zoning board has 5 members. I know 3 of them personally. Good people. Fair people. And the chair of the board? He smiled slightly. She's on the church council. I've known her 30 years. Tom felt something like hope crack through the exhaustion. You think she'd listen? I think she'd want to know if someone was weaponizing zoning codes for personal gain. Frank closed the notebook. But there's something else you need to know. About the land itself. What about it? Your property? The workshop lot? It's not just zoned residential. It's part of the Oak Street Historic District, designated in 1995. Frank pulled out printed documents from inside his coat. I looked it up. Historic properties have special protections. You can apply for a historic commercial variance. It's harder to get, but once you have it, it's nearly impossible to revoke. Tom stared at the papers. Dense legal language, county seals, maps showing property boundaries. Why didn't I know about this? Because it's obscure. Most people don't, but Tom... Frank leaned forward. The person who approves historic variances, that's not the zoning board. That's the county land trust administrator. And who's that? Frank smiled. That's the interesting part. The land trust is privately funded. Has been since the 80s. Anonymous donor, very generous. Basically runs the whole historic preservation program for the county. Tom felt pieces shifting. You know who the donor is? I made some calls, called in some favors. Frank slid a piece of paper across the table. A name, handwritten. Eleanor Hayes Land Trust. Tom stared. She owns it. She controls the historic variances. Has since 1985. After her husband died, she set it up in his memory. Very quiet about it. Doesn't like publicity. Frank's eyes were steady. Tom, your workshop permit? If Eleanor wanted to approve it, she could do it tomorrow. No hearing, no appeals, just done. The diner was quiet, except for the farmers arguing and the hiss of the griddle. Tom looked out at the snow, thoughts racing. Eleanor had known, from the beginning. Known his workshop was never really in danger. Known she had the power to protect him with a signature. And she hadn't told him. Testing, she'd said. Documentation. You look like you just figured something out, Frank said. Maybe. Tom folded the papers, slid them into his jacket. Frank, if I asked you to do something that might look bad on paper, but was the right thing to do, would you? Depends on the thing. Testifying, if it came to that, about the forged donation papers. Frank didn't hesitate. Yes. Even if it meant calling out Diane in front of the whole town? Especially then. Frank's voice was firm. A shepherd protects the flock, Tom, even from wolves in the pews. Tom nodded slowly. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We've got a long road ahead. Frank stood, dropped a 5 on the table. But Tom, you're not alone in this, remember that. The workshop was cold when Tom got back. February now, the kind of cold that settled into metal and stayed there. He fired up the space heater, but it would take an hour before the place felt human. He spread Eleanor's papers across his workbench. The forged documents, the zoning complaint, the development contract, all of it laid out like parts to a machine he was trying to understand. The bay door rattled. Tom's hand went to the wrench on his bench, instinct. Carl Miller stepped in, stamping snow off his boots. 70 years old, bent from decades of machinist work, hands scarred like Tom's. They'd worked together for 20 years before Carl retired. Heard you might need a hand, Carl said. Tom stared. Diane said, I know what Diane said. Called me a low-life grease monkey in front of half the church council. Carl's jaw set. She embarrassed me, sure, but mostly she embarrassed herself. Took me a while to get the guts to say it. Tom felt something tight in his chest loosen. I thought you agreed with her. Hell, Tom, I was ashamed I didn't stand up for you. Carl moved to the workbench, looked at the papers. What's all this? Tom explained. The fraud, the timeline, the 60-day deadline, watching Carl's face darken as the story unfolded. That son of a bitch, Carl muttered. And Diane's in on it? Up to her neck. Carl pulled out his reading glasses, studied the documents. His hands moved over them, careful, precise. Machinist's hands, used to measuring things in thousandths of an inch. You know what we need? He said finally. A miracle? A case, built right, no gaps. Carl looked up, eyes sharp. Remember what you always told me? Measure twice, cut once. Build it right the first time because you won't get a second chance. Tom felt something shift. Not hope exactly, more like clarity. You're talking about evidence. I'm talking about precision. But Carl moved to Tom's tool chest, pulled out a micrometer. Look at these signatures. Rick's on the development contract. Tom leaned in. The signatures were identical. Perfect loops, perfect angles. Nobody signs their name exactly the same way twice, Carl said. Not naturally, but a stamp is perfect every time. He pulled out a loop, the kind watchmakers used. Look at the ink distribution. Too even, no pressure variation. Tom looked. Carl was right. The ink sat on top of the paper, didn't bite in like a pen would. He's using a signature stamp, Tom said slowly. Bet your ass he is. Probably has a drawer full of them, different names, different victims. Carl set down the loop. But stamps leave marks, Tom, physical marks. If we can get our hands on the originals, not copies, originals, we can prove it. Tom thought about Eleanor's folder. I might be able to get them. Then we build a case. Organize it like we'd organize a precision job. Carl pulled out a yellow pad, started sketching. Timeline here, documents here, witnesses here, Everything cross-referenced, dated, sourced. Make it so clean a blind man could follow it. We'd need help. So we get help. Carl tapped the pad. Frank's already in. Mabel's got receipts from when Diane and Rick met at the diner. Dates, times, how long they stayed. Joe down at the hardware store, he mentioned Diane bought a whole stack of for sale signs in December, before she told you about any of this. Tom felt pieces clicking together. A pattern. A pattern. Shows premeditation. Carl looked up. Tom, you taught me everything I know about building things right. Now let's build this. Let's build it so good they can't tear it down. Tom looked at his old friend, at the workbench that had been his father's, at the tools organized on pegboards, each one in its place, each one with a purpose. Okay, he said, let's build it. They worked until the sun went down, organizing, sorting, measuring. Carl made lists, Tom made diagrams. The workshop slowly warmed, space heater glowing orange in the corner. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside, for the first time in weeks, Tom felt like he was doing something useful. Carl held up the micrometer like a compass. Signature depth analysis. If Rick's using a stamp on forged contracts, we measure the pressure variance. Fraud leaves marks, Tom. Physical marks. We just gotta know where to look. Tom took the tool, felt its familiar weight. 40 years using instruments like this, measuring things down to 0.005 of an inch, finding flaws invisible to the naked eye. Maybe that's all this was, a different kind of precision work. Find the flaws, document them, build the case so tight it couldn't leak. March 15th, Tom said. That's when they'll move. That's when we need to be ready. Carl nodded. Then we got 56 days to build something that'll hold. They shook hands. Carl's grip was firm, sure. The handshake of men who'd spent their lives building things that mattered. After Carl left, Tom stood alone in the workshop. The space heater hummed. Outside, a truck passed, headlights cutting through the falling snow. Tom looked at the evidence spread across his bench. His father's bench. Built in 1968, still solid, still level after 57 years. Some things, if you built them right, lasted forever. He was going to build this right. Tom was alone in the workshop when he heard Diane's car pull up. Not her usual time. Mid-afternoon, on a Thursday, when she should have been showing houses. The engine cut off. 2 car doors slammed. 2. He wiped his hands on a rag, stepped out of the bay. Diane stood by her car, wearing her real estate smile. The one that didn't reach her eyes. Next to her, Rick Brennan, all confidence in cologne that smelled expensive even from 10 feet away. Tom, Diane said, sweet as poison, we need to talk about finances. Rick's handshake was firm, practiced. Good to see you again, Tom. Diane's told me a lot about you. I'm sure she has. Tom's voice stayed flat. What's this about? Can we go inside? Diane gestured toward the house. Kitchen table stuff? Adult conversation? Tom led them in, aware of Rick's eyes cataloging everything. The worn linoleum, the old appliances, the coffee pot from 1992 that still worked fine, assessing value, finding weaknesses. Diane spread papers on the kitchen table. Official-looking documents with seals and signatures and dense paragraphs of legal language Tom would need a lawyer to parse. We've been looking at our financial situation, Diane began, using her client voice. Professional, detached. And with your workshop technically operating at a loss, it's not operating at a loss. And the property tax burden, and the zoning issues, she talked over him like he hadn't spoken. We need to streamline our assets, protect ourselves. Rick leaned forward, elbows on the table. This is actually pretty straightforward, Tom. Debt consolidation. We roll the workshop property, the house mortgage, and some outstanding credit obligations into one clean package. Lower interest rate, better terms. Financially, it's a no-brainer. Tom looked at the papers, saw his name typed at the bottom, saw property deed transfer in small print halfway down the second page. This isn't debt consolidation, he said quietly. This is you taking the workshop. It's restructuring, Diane corrected. The property would be held in a family trust, for both our benefits. A trust you control, a trust we control. Her smile tightened. Tom, you're being paranoid. He flipped to the third page, read the fine print. Whitaker Workshop LLC transferred to Brennan Development Holdings, pending loan satisfaction. He looked up at Rick. That's your company. It's a temporary holding structure, Rick said smoothly. For tax purposes. Once the development proceeds, what development? The Oak Street Commercial District project. Rick pulled out glossy brochures, architectural renderings, modern buildings, parking lots, retail spaces. We're going to revitalize this whole area. Your property is right in the footprint, prime location. Tom stared at the rendering. His workshop was gone. In its place, a coffee shop with outdoor seating. I'm not interested. Diane's smile disappeared. Tom, we're not asking. Then what are you doing? She stood, hands flat on the table. I'm trying to save us from financial ruin. Your workshop is costing us money. The zoning complaint means you can't operate legally. If we don't act now, the county will force a sale anyway, and we'll get pennies on the dollar. Or, Tom said, meeting her eyes, you could drop the complaint since you're the one who filed it. Silence. Rick's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Calculation. Diane laughed, sharp, brittle. That's insane. Why would I? Anonymous complaint filed January 3rd. Same day you called Eleanor Hayes about the investment opportunity. Same week Rick contacted her about development funding. Tom kept his voice level. That's a lot of coincidences, Diane. Rick stood. Tom, I think maybe you've been under a lot of stress. Sometimes when we're worried about, I'm not signing anything. Diane's face went hard. Really hard. In a way Tom had never seen in 40 years of marriage. Then I'm filing for divorce. The words hung in the air like smoke from a cold engine. Diane, tomorrow morning. I've already talked to a lawyer. Her voice was ice. And I'm citing financial incompetence, reckless mismanagement of marital assets, refusal to cooperate in debt resolution. Tom felt the floor tilt. Financial incompetence? You've been running that workshop at a loss for 5 years, Tom. Fixing things for free, giving away your labor, refusing to modernize or scale up. She ticked off points on her fingers. Any judge will see you're not capable of managing property responsibly. You're lying. I'm protecting myself. Diane grabbed her purse. Sign those papers or face me in divorce court. Your choice. But either way, I'm getting what I'm owed. Rick stayed calm, reasonable. Tom, think about this. Divorce is expensive, messy. Diane's lawyer will subpoena every financial record you have, every free repair you've done, every widow whose furnace you fixed for nothing. It'll all come out. You'll look like a charity case who can't run a business. Or, Diane added, her voice sharp, you sign. The workshop transfers smoothly. We develop the property, and you get a fair cut of the profits. Clean, simple, no lawyers. Tom looked at them both. At Diane, who'd slept beside him for 40 years. At Rick, who'd smiled and shaken his hand while planning to steal everything. Get out, Tom said quietly. Tom, get out of my house. Rick gathered the papers. You've got 24 hours to reconsider. After that, we file. And Tom, he paused at the door. Judges side with the spouse who manages the money. That's Diane. You'll lose the workshop and the house. Your choice. They left. Diane didn't look back. Tom stood in his kitchen, listening to her car start, listening to them drive away. The house was silent, except for the refrigerator humming and the clock ticking and the sound of his own breathing. 40 years, gone. The Grace Community Fellowship Hall smelled like old coffee and hymnals. Wednesday night, usually quiet, but tonight the place was packed. 70, maybe 80 people crammed into folding chairs. Tom counted faces, half the town. Rick stood at the front with a projector, showing those glossy renderings. Oak Street Commercial District, in bold letters. Modern, clean, promising. Create 47 new jobs, Rick was saying, smile practiced. Increase property values across the district by an estimated 30%. This is growth, people. Smart growth, sustainable growth. Murmurs of approval. Tom sat in the back row, Pastor Frank beside him. Carl 3 seats over. Eleanor hadn't arrived yet. Of course, Rick continued, development on this scale requires sacrifice. Some of our older structures will need to be repurposed, but that's progress. That's how communities thrive. A hand went up. Joe from the hardware store. What structures are we talking about? Primarily commercial spaces, currently in violation of zoning codes. Rick clicked to a new slide. A map. Red dots marking properties. Tom's workshop was the biggest dot. These buildings are operating illegally or have safety concerns. Converting them to compliant, modern facilities benefits everyone. That's Tom Whitaker's workshop, someone said. Rick's smile never wavered. Mr. Whitaker has been notified of the zoning issues. We're working with him to find a mutually beneficial solution. Working with him or forcing him out? That was Mabel, standing near the coffee urn, arms crossed. Nobody's forcing anyone. Diane stood now, moving to the front. Tom's stomach clenched. She was dressed for business, suit, heels, hair perfect. My husband and I are cooperating fully with the development plan. Tom understands the financial benefits. The lie was smooth, confident. Half the room nodded like it made sense. Tom started to stand. Frank's hand on his arm stopped him. Not yet, the pastor murmured. Wait. Rick clicked to a financial projection slide. By year 3, we're looking at $2.4 million in new revenue for the county. Better schools, better roads, better services. All we need is community support. More nods, more murmurs. The back door opened. Eleanor Hayes stepped in, leaning on a cane Tom had never seen her use. She moved slow, fragile-looking. Her assistant Elena followed, carrying a large folder. The room went quiet. Eleanor Hayes didn't come to town meetings. She made her way to the front, each step careful. Rick's smile faltered for just a second before sliding back into place. Mrs. Hayes, he said, loud and slow, we're so glad you could join us. Would you like Elena to translate? I know communication can be challenging. Eleanor reached the front, turned to face the room. Her hands moved, signing. Elena spoke. I don't need things made simple, Mr. Brennan. I need them made honest. A ripple went through the crowd. Eleanor's hands kept moving, precise and deliberate. You approached me 6 weeks ago with an investment opportunity. You said this development was fully funded, fully planned, and needed only a final investor to proceed. That's correct, Rick said, still smiling. You lied. The room went dead silent. Eleanor's hands moved faster now, Elena's voice keeping pace. You have no funding, no permits, no actual development plan beyond these pretty pictures. What you have is a scheme to acquire property cheaply through forced sales, then flip it to actual developers for profit. Mrs. Hayes, I think there's been a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding. Eleanor pulled documents from the folder Elena held. I've been documenting every conversation we've had, every phone call, every meeting. I read lips, Mr. Brennan. I heard every word you thought I couldn't hear. Rick's face went pale. Diane stood. Eleanor, I think you're confused about... Eleanor's hands cut through the air like knives. I'm not confused. I'm 76 years old, deaf since childhood, and I've built a $900 million company from nothing. Don't you dare call me confused. She turned to the room, signing slowly so everyone could see Elena translate. This man tried to scam me out of $200,000. Your neighbor's wife helped him. They forged documents, filed false zoning complaints, and tried to force Tom Whitaker off property his father built in 1968. The murmurs turned angry. Tom saw faces changing, saw people looking at Diane different. And here's something else you should know. Eleanor's expression was steel. That zoning complaint against Tom's workshop? It's meaningless, because Tom's property is part of the Oak Street Historic District, and She paused, letting it land. I control the Historic Land Trust that approves all variances in this district. Tom's breath caught. I've controlled it since 1985. My husband and I established it after our son died in Korea. Eleanor's hands moved gently now, reverent. He was deaf, like me, and he taught me that silence isn't weakness, it's patience. She looked directly at Tom. Tom Whitaker's workshop? I approved his historic commercial variance on February 1st, 3 weeks ago. The permit is already granted. His property was never in danger from the zoning complaint. The room erupted, voices overlapping, people standing, shouting questions. Tom sat frozen. She'd protected him. From the beginning, without telling him. Testing, she'd said. No, not testing, protecting. Eleanor waited for the noise to die down, then her hands moved down one last time. I wanted to see who in this town would stand up for an old woman being cheated. Tom Whitaker did, before he knew who I was, before he knew I had money or power or could help him. Her eyes swept the room. That's character. And that's the kind of person this town should be protecting, not exploiting. She turned to Rick. You have 24 hours to withdraw your development proposal and leave this county, or I will file fraud charges with the state attorney general. I have everything documented, every lie, every forged signature, every fake contract. Rick's mouth opened, closed. He looked at Diane. Diane stared at Eleanor like she was seeing a ghost. Meeting adjourned, Pastor Frank said quietly from the back. I think we all need time to process this. People started filing out, some angry, some confused, most avoiding Diane entirely. Tom made his way to the front. Eleanor watched him approach, her expression unreadable. You knew, Tom said, the whole time. You had the power to protect the workshop, and you just— I protected you immediately, Eleanor interrupted, signing as Elena translated. The day you picked up my wallet, the day you showed me kindness, without knowing what I could do for you. Her hand softened. I approved that variance because you earned it, Tom, not through connections or politics or manipulation, through decency. Tom felt something crack in his chest. You should have told me. If I'd told you, would you have believed me, or would you have thought I was manipulating you too? Eleanor's eyes were sad. Sometimes the only way to prove you're not being used is to give the gift before it's asked for. Tom looked at this woman who'd lost a son, built an empire, and still had time to test whether a broken-down machinist would help a stranger. Thank you, he said quietly. Eleanor nodded. Now go home, rest. Tomorrow, the real work begins. She left, leaning on that cane, Elena beside her. The fellowship hall emptied until it was just Tom and Frank and Carl. Well, Carl said finally. That was something. Tom sank into a folding chair. His hands were shaking. Frank sat beside him. You okay? I don't know. Tom looked at his palms. Scarred, oil-stained, trembling. 40 years, Frank. 40 years, and my wife tried to destroy me for a real estate deal. I know. And I won. The workshop's safe. Eleanor protected it. Tom laughed, bitter. But it feels like I lost everything anyway. Frank was quiet for a moment. Then, you didn't lose your integrity. That's something Diane can't say. Outside, snow started falling again. Tom watched it through the windows. White, clean, covering everything. He'd won, so why did it feel like the floor had dropped out from under his life? The Hayes estate looked different in late February. Ice melting off the eaves, dripping steady. The sound of thaw, not quite spring, but winter losing its grip. Tom sat in his truck outside the gates for a long time before pressing the intercom button. The anger had settled into something colder, harder. Eleanor met him at the door herself this time. No Elena, no assistant, just her, wearing a cardigan that looked hand-knitted, reading glasses on a chain. I wondered when you'd come, she signed. Tom followed her to the sunroom. The tea service was already set out. 2 cups. He didn't sit. You manipulated me, he said. Eleanor poured tea like he'd said something about the weather. I protected you. Without asking, without telling me. Tom's hands were fists at his sides. You let me think I was fighting for my workshop when you'd already saved it. You let me feel desperate and scared when you could have. Could have what? Eleanor set down the teapot, her movements precise. Told you on day 1 that I had the power to fix everything. And then what would you have done, Tom? You would have felt obligated. Her hands moved sharp, cutting. You would have helped me because you owed me, not because it was right. And I wouldn't have known if you were a good man or just another person who helps when there's something in it for them. Tom opened his mouth, closed it. I've had 50 years of people being nice to me because of my money, Eleanor continued, signing even as she spoke aloud, her voice careful and measured. Smiling to my face while planning how to use me. I needed to know if you were different. So you tested me, like a lab rat. I tested your character. Eleanor met his eyes. And you passed, Tom, before you knew I was wealthy, before you knew I could help. You saw an old woman being hurt, and you stopped it. That's who you are. Tom sank into a chair, the anger draining out, leaving just exhaustion. Diane filed for divorce this morning, he said quietly. Eleanor nodded. I know. Elena has a friend at the courthouse. She's claiming I'm financially incompetent, that I've been running the workshop at a loss, that I'm not capable of managing property. Tom laughed, bitter. 40 years of marriage, and she's going to paint me as a charity case who can't handle his own affairs. Eleanor poured his tea, pushed the cup toward him. What are you going to do? I don't know. Tom wrapped his hands around the warm cup. They'd stopped shaking finally. Part of me wants to fight, prove she's wrong, prove I built something that mattered. And the other part? The other part is tired, Eleanor. Tired of fighting. Tired of feeling like I have to justify my whole life to people who've already decided I'm worthless. The sunroom was quiet except for the drip of melting ice outside. Eleanor sipped her tea, watching him. My husband used to say something, she signed finally. He said the difference between a good man and a great one is what he does when he's already won. I didn't win. My marriage is over. Your marriage was over the day Diane forged your signature. You just didn't know it yet. Eleanor leaned forward. But the workshop? Your reputation? Your integrity? Those you can still fight for? The question is, do you want to? Tom thought about his father, about the workshop built in 1968, about 40 years of fixing things people said couldn't be fixed. Yeah, he said finally. I want to. Eleanor smiled. Not victory, just quiet approval. Then let me make you an offer. Not charity, not manipulation, a real business proposition. I'm listening. Your workshop. I'll fund the expansion. Not a loan, an investment. We turn it into a legitimate restoration business. Farm equipment, small engines, whatever needs fixing. Her hands moved precise, businesslike. You do the work. I provide the capital and the business structure. We split profits 60-40, your favor. Tom stared. Why? Because this county needs people who fix things instead of tearing them down. Because you're good at what you do. And because Eleanor's expression softened. Because my son would have liked you. He believed in people who built things with their hands. Tom looked at his scarred palms, thought about what they'd built, what they could still build. There's a condition, he said slowly. What's that? I finish this my way, with precision. Tom met her eyes. I appreciate what you did, the permit, the protection, but from here on out I need to do this myself. Build the case against Diane and Rick. Prove the fraud. My way. Eleanor studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Like a machinist. Exactly like a machinist. And if you need help, then I'll ask for it. As a partner, not as someone you're protecting. Tom extended his hand. Deal? Eleanor shook it. Her grip was firm. Sure. Deal. But Tom, you have until May. That's when Rick files the development liens if he hasn't been stopped. That's your deadline. May? Tom did the math. 11 weeks. That's enough time. To build what? A case they can't tear down. Tom stood. Thank you, Eleanor, for the offer, for believing in me. But I need to do this part myself. Eleanor watched him go, something like pride in her expression. Tom drove home through melting snow, mud on the roads, the smell of wet earth starting to replace the cold metal scent of winter. He had 11 weeks, time to build something that would last. The workshop felt different now. Not warmer, still February cold, space heater struggling, but purposeful. Tom had cleared the main workbench, laid out tools like surgical instruments. Carl arrived at 6 p.m. with coffee and sandwiches from Mabel's. Set them down, looked at the organized chaos. What are we building? He asked. Tom pulled out a metal case. Foam-lined, divided into sections. Evidence box, everything we know about Rick and Diane's fraud. Organized, cross-referenced, irrefutable. Like a precision job. Exactly like a precision job. Tom arranged tools across the bench. Micrometer, calipers, dial indicator, a jeweler's loop, his father's level brass and walnut, still perfectly true after 50 years. Carl picked up the micrometer. What's this for? Signature analysis. Tom pulled out Rick's contracts, Diane's forged documents. Nobody signs their name exactly the same way twice. Pressure varies, angle changes, but a stamp is perfect every time. Carl understood immediately. We measure the ink depth, and the pressure distribution, and the paper compression. Tom pulled out labeled folders. Every document Rick's has signed in the last 6 months. I've been collecting them, bank papers, county filings, contract signatures. Carl whistled low. Where'd you get all this? Eleanor's lawyer, Joe's wife's cousin at the county, Mabel's receipts. Tom tapped each folder. Public records mostly, legal to obtain, but we measure them, find the pattern. Carl set down his coffee, all business now. Show me. They worked in silence. Tom measuring, Carl recording, the precision of it settling over them like muscle memory. This they understood, finding flaws in metal, in welds, in anything built by human hands. Here. Carl pointed at 3 signatures on different documents. Look at the B in Brennan, identical loop diameter, same angle, same pressure. Tom measured with the calipers. 2.3 millimeters. All 3. Exactly. Oh, that's impossible. Not naturally. Not impossible. Tom held up the documents to the light. Mechanical. He's using a stamp. Probably has a dozen of them, different names. Carl pulled out more papers. What about Diane's signatures? Tom hesitated. Looking at his wife's handwriting felt wrong, invasive, but he measured anyway. These are real, he said finally. Variable pressure. Natural slant differences. She actually signed these. Which means she knew what she was doing, wasn't coerced. Tom nodded, jaw tight. They worked until midnight, the workshop warming slowly, space heater glowing orange. Outside, the sound of dripping water, ice melting, running into gutters, into storm drains, into the earth. By the time Carl left, they had a system. Folders labeled by type. Contracts, signatures, timeline, witnesses, financial records. Tom held up his father's level. The bubble sat perfect center, even after all these years. Truth is like this, he said to the empty workshop. You can't fake it. You can cover it, hide it, bury it, but if you measure careful enough, it always shows. He set the level on top of the evidence box, symbolic. Outside, a truck passed, then silence except for the drip of melting snow and the tick of tools cooling on the bench. Tom looked at what they'd built. 11 weeks to finish it. 11 weeks to make it hold. He thought about what Eleanor had said. The difference between a good man and a great one is what he does when he's already won. But he hadn't won. Not yet. He'd just stopped losing. Now came the hard part. Building something strong enough to withstand everything Diane and Rick would throw at it. Building it with the same precision his father had taught him. Measure twice. Cut once. Make it right the first time, because you won't get a second chance. Tom locked the workshop, stood outside in the cold February night. Smelled rain coming. Not snow. Rain. Spring was coming. He just had to survive until it arrived. The hardware store smelled like sawdust and machine oil. Tom needed sandpaper, drill bits, wood screws for a repair job, routine stuff. March now, mud season, everything thawing. But when he walked in, the conversation stopped. Joe was behind the counter, head down, suddenly very interested in his inventory clipboard. Two men, Tom recognized from church, Dave something, worked at the grain elevator, stood by the paint aisle. They saw him, whispered to each other, walked toward the back. Tom grabbed what he needed, brought it to the counter. Joe rang it up without meeting his eyes. $23.40. Tom handed over cash, waited for change. Joe? Yeah? Something wrong? Joe's jaw worked like he was chewing words he didn't want to swallow. Tom, look, people are talking. About what? About you, about the divorce. Joe finally looked up. Diane's been making the rounds, telling people you've been having, he lowered his voice, that you've been unstable, paranoid. She showed documents to the Realtor Association, said you've been harassing her business partner, making wild accusations. Tom felt cold settle in his gut. What kind of accusations? Fraud, conspiracy. She's saying you're having some kind of breakdown. Joe slid the change across the counter. Half the town thinks you're losing it, Tom. The other half doesn't know what to think. And you? Joe met his eyes. I think Diane Whitaker's been lying through her teeth since Christmas, but I'm one man, and she's got a lot of people convinced. Tom pocketed the change, picked up his bag. Thanks for telling me. He made it to the truck before his hands started shaking. Inside, the radio was playing, some old country song about whiskey and regret. Tom turned it off, sat in silence, gripping the steering wheel, watching people go in and out of the hardware store. Normal people, normal lives. Nobody thinking about fraud or divorce or reputations destroyed by lies. A knock on the window made him jump. Joe stood there, holding something. Tom rolled down the window. My wife's cousin, the county clerk. Joe handed over a business card. She wants to talk to you, said it's important. Tom looked at the card. Sarah Chin County Records Office. When? Tonight, 6 p.m., Mabel's Diner. Joe glanced back at the store. And Tom, whatever Diane's saying, I don't believe it. Neither does Mabel. Neither does Carl. You're not alone. Feels like I am. Yeah, well, feelings lie sometimes. Joe clapped the truck door. 6 p.m., don't be late. Mabel's was quiet at 6, just Tom and Carl in the back booth, coffee going cold while they waited. Sarah Chin arrived at 6:15, mid-40s, gray suit, the kind of tired that came from dealing with bureaucracy all day. She slid into the booth, declined coffee, pulled out a manila folder. Joe said you're investigating Rick Brennan. That's right, Tom said. Good, because Rick Brennan is a predator. Sarah opened the folder. Real name's Richard Brenner, changed it legally in 2019. Want to guess why? Tom and Carl exchanged looks. Sarah slid over photocopied documents, court records. Adams County, 2018. Richard Brenner accused of defrauding an elderly woman named Martha Hoskins out of $47,000. Investment scheme, forged signatures, same pattern you're describing. Tom's pulse quickened. What happened? She dropped the charges, said she was mistaken, that it was all a misunderstanding. Sarah pulled out another document. Porter County, 2016. Richard Brenner accused of attempting to force a Korean War veteran into selling his farm through fraudulent lien claims. Veteran dropped charges after mysterious change of heart. He threatened them, Carl said quietly. Or paid them off, or both. Sarah spread out more papers. 3 counties, 5 complaints over 8 years, every single one dropped before trial, every victim elderly, every pattern identical, forged documents, property schemes, elder exploitation. Tom felt something hot and sharp in his chest. Not quite hope, more like vindication. Why wasn't he prosecuted? No victims willing to testify. And Richard's, very good at covering his tracks, uses different business names, different partners, moves between counties. Sarah tapped the papers. But he's getting bolder. The schemes are bigger. The target's wealthier. Like Eleanor Hayes. Exactly like Eleanor Hayes. Sarah pulled out one more document. This came through county records yesterday. Notice of investigation. State Attorney General's Office. Fraud Division. They're looking into Richard Brenner's activities across multiple jurisdictions. Tom stared. They're already investigating? Have been for 6 months. But they need victims willing to testify. Solid evidence. Paper trails they can follow. Sarah looked directly at Tom. Joe said you're building a case. How solid is it? Getting there. Not good enough. Sarah pulled out a business card, different from Joe's. This is the AG investigator assigned to Brenner's case, Lydia Moss. She'll want to see everything you have, and she'll want Eleanor Hayes' testimony. Eleanor's already documented everything. Then you need to get it to Moss, soon. Sarah's expression was grim. Because here's what you don't know. Rick filed a restraining order against you yesterday. Claims you've been harassing him, threatening him, interfering with his business. Tom felt the floor drop. That's insane. It's strategic. If you approach him now, you're violating a court order. He can have you arrested. Sarah leaned forward. He's isolating you, Tom, cutting you off from ways to fight back. It's what he does. It's how he wins. Carl's hand hit the table. So we're supposed to just let him? No, you're supposed to be smarter than him. Sarah slid the investigator's card across the table. Call Lydia Moss. Tomorrow. Give her everything. Let the state handle the criminal case while you handle the divorce. The divorce doesn't matter if I'm in jail for violating a restraining order. You won't be, because you're not going to approach Rick or Diane without a lawyer present. Sarah gathered her papers. Tom, I've seen men like Brenner destroy lives. Good people, honest people who thought playing fair mattered. It doesn't. Not with him. Then what matters? Sarah stood. Being more thorough than he is ruthless, building a case so airtight he can't breathe, and trusting the right people to help you. After she left, Tom and Carl sat in silence. Mabel brought fresh coffee without being asked. 5 victims, Carl said finally. 8 years, and he's still walking around free. Not for long. Tom pulled out his phone. I'm calling Eleanor's lawyer, tonight. And then I'm calling this Lydia Moss. And then? Then we finish the evidence box. Tom looked at his friend. We got 8 weeks until May. Rick thinks he's isolated me. He doesn't know I've got a 76-year-old billionaire, a county clerk, and a state investigator on my side. Carl grinned. Plus a grumpy old machinist who's pretty good with a micrometer. That too. Outside, the rain started. Soft at first, then harder. Not snow, not ice, just rain, washing the last of winter away. Tom made the calls right there in the booth. First Eleanor's lawyer, Charles Morrison, who answered on the second ring and promised to coordinate with the aide's office. Then Lydia Moss, who listened without interrupting and said 6 words that made Tom's chest loosen. Mr. Whitaker, we've been waiting for this. When he hung up, Mabel refilled their coffee again. On the house, she said. And Tom, that man's got 5 victims we know about. Don't you let yourself be the 6th. Tom nodded, wrapped his hands around the warm mug, watched rain streak the diner windows. Rick Brennan thought he was untouchable. thought 5-drop charges meant he could keep hunting, but he'd never dealt with someone who measured things in thousandths of an inch. Who knew that precision mattered more than speed? Who understood that the best way to catch a predator was to build a trap he couldn't see until it closed? 8 weeks, Tom said quietly. Carl raised his coffee cup. Then let's make them count. They clinked mugs, coffee sloshed, cheap ceramic ringing like a bell. Outside, the rain kept falling. But inside, for the first time in months, Tom felt like he was winning. April, rain drummed on the workshop's tin roof, steady, patient, the kind that soaked into everything. Tom sat at his workbench, space heater humming, staring at a photograph he kept in his toolbox. Their wedding day, Diane in white, him in a borrowed suit that didn't fit right. Both of them grinning like they'd figured out a secret the rest of the world didn't know yet. Young, stupid, sure of everything. He traced her face with his thumb, tried to remember when she'd started looking at him like he was an embarrassment instead of a partner. The evidence box sat beside him, metal, foam-lined, organized like a precision instrument. Every lie documented, every fraud measured, every signature analyzed down to the thousandth of an inch. All he had to do was give it to Lydia Moss. The state AG would do the rest. Criminal charges, trial, prison time for Rick, maybe for Diane too, justice. So why did his hands feel so heavy? Thunder rolled, distant but getting closer. The workshop lights flickered. Tom opened the box, pulled out Diane's signatures, the church donation forgery, the partnership agreements, her handwriting, careful and familiar. He'd watched her sign grocery lists with that same hand for 40 years. "Where'd you go?" he asked the empty workshop. "Where'd the woman I married go?" The door rattled. Tom's head snapped up. Pastor Frank stepped in, shaking rain off his jacket. "Saw your light on. Figured you might want company." Tom closed the evidence box. "Not really in a talking mood, Frank." "Good. Neither am I." Frank grabbed a folding chair, dragged it over, sat down heavy. They listened to the rain together for a while. Finally, Frank spoke. "You having second thoughts?" Not a question. Tom looked at the photograph still sitting on the bench. 40 years, Frank. We were kids when we got married, didn't know anything about anything, but we figured it out together, built a life. And now she's trying to tear it down." "Yeah," Tom's voice cracked. "And I'm about to send her to prison for it. What kind of man does that make me?" "The kind who stands up for what's right. Or the kind who's just taking revenge dressed up as justice." Tom pushed the photo away. "How do I know which one it is? How do I know I'm not just—" He couldn't finish. Frank leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Let me ask you something. If this wasn't Diane, if this was some stranger, say Rick, would you hesitate to report the fraud?" "No." "Why not?" "Because he's hurting people. Eleanor, that Martha Hoskins woman in Adams County, the veteran in Porter County." Tom's hands clenched. "Because predators don't stop unless someone stops them." "And Diane? Is she a predator?" Tom wanted to say no, wanted to believe his wife of 40 years was just misguided, just scared, just following Rick's lead. But he thought about the forged signatures, the calculated timeline, the way she'd laughed at Eleanor in that parking lot, the cold precision of the divorce filing. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think maybe she is." "Then you've answered your own question." Frank's voice was gentle but firm. "This isn't revenge, Tom. This is protection, of Eleanor, of the next person Rick and Diane target, of yourself. Doesn't feel clean. Righteous things rarely do." Frank stood, moved to look at the evidence box. "My grandfather used to say, sometimes love means stopping someone from hurting others, even if it breaks your heart to do it." Tom looked at the wedding photo, at Diane's smile, frozen in time, before whatever had changed inside her had taken root. "I still love her," he said. "That's the part I can't. I still love who she was, or who I thought she was." "I know." Frank put a hand on Tom's shoulder. "That's what makes this cost something. If you didn't care, it'd be easy." Thunder cracked closer now. The lights flickered again, held. "Will she go to prison?" Tom asked. "I don't know. Maybe. Maybe she'll take a plea deal. Maybe the state will focus on Rick and give her immunity for testifying." Frank squeezed Tom's shoulder. "But Tom, that's not your decision. Your job is to tell the truth. Let the courts decide what happens next." Tom nodded slowly. The rain kept drumming. "There's something else you should know," Frank said. "Diane approached the church council yesterday, asked them to officially condemn you, Said you were harassing her, spreading lies about respected community members. Tom felt something go cold. What did they say? 3 of them wanted to take it to a vote. The other 4 told her to leave. Frank's expression was grim. She's not just attacking your reputation, Tom. She's trying to isolate you from everyone who might support you. Classic abuser tactic. She's not an abuser. She's someone trying to destroy your life to enrich herself. What do you call that? Tom didn't have an answer. Frank moved toward the door, paused. You know what my grandfather also said? He said the measure of a man isn't whether he falls, it's whether he stands back up. And Tom, he looked back. You're standing. Keep standing. After Frank left, Tom sat alone with the rain and the evidence box and the photograph from 1983. He thought about his father, about the workshop built with honest hands, about James Park, the deaf vet who'd taught him that real communication meant seeing people, not just hearing them, about Eleanor, who'd been testing not his strength but his character. Tom picked up the photograph, looked at it one last time. Then he put it back in his toolbox, closed the lid, and locked it. Some things you had to let go, even if they took 40 years of your life with them. The workshop smelled like rain and coffee and WD-40. Tom laid out tools with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation. Carl arrived at 7, carrying takeout from Mabel's in a determined expression. Tonight, Tom said. We finish it tonight. About damn time. They worked in silence at first, Tom measuring documents with the micrometer, Carl cross-referencing dates against county records. The evidence box opened between them, slowly filling with organized proof. Here's Adams County, Carl said, sliding papers into labeled sleeves. Martha Hoskins, Richard, used the same property lien strategy, filed false encumbrance claims, forced her to settle. Tom added his measurements. Signature stamp, same one he's using now. Look at the B in Brenner, 2-3 millimeters. Exact match. He's not even trying to hide it. Why would he? 5 complaints, 5 dropped charges. He thinks he's invincible. Carl pulled out another stack. Porter County, the veteran. Same thing. Forged liens, pressure tactics, sudden withdrawal of complaint. He looked up. Tom, there's a pattern here. Every victim withdrew charges exactly 1 week after filing, every single one. Tom felt something click. He threatens them, gives them a week to think about it, then offers a settlement that's just barely enough to make them go away. Classic intimidation. Yeah, but... Tom pulled out his notes. Eleanor filed her complaint with the AG 6 weeks ago. Rick hasn't approached her with a settlement. Because he doesn't know she filed. Carl grinned. He thinks she's just a confused old lady who dropped it. Which means he's vulnerable. He doesn't know the investigation is active. They kept working. Documents sorted by type, by date, by relevance. Each one in a clear, protective sleeve. Each one labeled, indexed, cross-referenced. A machinist's approach to justice. Around 9 p.m., headlights swept across the workshop windows. Tom tensed, but it was Eleanor's car. She stepped out carefully, carrying something wrapped in cloth. I have something for you, she signed when Tom opened the door. Eleanor unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a document, official-looking, with the Grace Community Church letterhead. The donation form, Tom said, recognizing it. The one Diane forged with your signature. Pastor Frank retrieved it from church records. Eleanor's hands moved precisely. He had a handwriting expert examine it. Someone from the state police lab. Certified analysis. She handed Tom the report. He read it twice, Carl looking over his shoulder. The expert had compared Diane's known handwriting samples against the signature on the donation form. Match probability, 98.7%. The signature was Diane's hand attempting to mimic Eleanor's. This proves she forged it, Tom said. It proves she committed fraud to establish a false relationship with me, to make Rick's investment scheme look legitimate. Eleanor's expression was steel. And Tom, there's more. Frank checked with the IRS. Diane claimed that $50,000 donation as a tax deduction on her business returns. Federal tax fraud. Carl whistled low. That's not county court. That's federal. 5 to 7 years if convicted, Eleanor confirmed. Frank's already forwarded the information to Lydia Moss at the AG's office. Tom stared at the document, at his wife's handwriting, carefully forging an old woman's signature to steal her credibility and her money. When did you become this person? He asked the paper. Eleanor's hand touched his arm. Sometimes people don't become something new. They just stop hiding what they always were. Tom carefully placed the donation form in the evidence box. Last piece, final proof. He labeled it Exhibit D, Church Donation Forgery, Federal Tax Fraud. Then he closed the box, locked it with a small brass padlock, set his father's level on top, the bubble sitting perfect center, perfectly true. "It's done," he said. Carl and Eleanor looked at the box. Metal, foam-lined, organized with the precision of 40 years' working tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. "Tomorrow," Tom said, "I deliver this to Lydia Moss, and then Rick Brennan's done," Carl finished. Eleanor signed, "And Diane?" Tom thought about the photograph in his toolbox, about 40 years, about the woman who'd laughed at an old lady's deafness, about the cold calculation it took to forge signatures, file fraudulent taxes, destroy a marriage for real estate profit. "And Diane faces what she's earned," he said quietly. Eleanor nodded. "Justice. Justice," Tom agreed. After Eleanor left, Tom and Carl sat in the quiet workshop. Rain had stopped, just the sound of water dripping from eaves, running into gutters. "You okay?" Carl asked. Tom looked at the evidence box, at the level, sitting on top. True, after all these years. "No," he said honestly, "but I will be." Carl stood, stretched. May 1st is 3 weeks away, Rick's deadline for filing the development liens. "He won't make it," Tom's voice was certain. "By May 1st, he'll be in custody. And Diane," he stopped, couldn't finish. "She made her choices, Tom. I know." After Carl left, Tom sat alone with the evidence box and the sound of water finding its way downhill, the way truth always did, eventually, seeking level ground, seeking the low places where nothing could hide. He thought about his father's words, "Build it right the first time, son, because you won't get a second chance." Tom had built it right. Now came the hardest part, watching it work. The Grace Community Fellowship Hall felt smaller with 90 people crammed into it. Mid-April, warm enough that the windows stood open, letting in the smell of rain-soaked earth and fresh-cut grass. Spring, finally. Tom sat in the back row again, but this time Carl was beside him, Pastor Frank on the other side. Eleanor 3 rows up, Elena translating quietly, Mabel near the coffee urn, Joe from the hardware store, Sarah Chin from County Records. Rick stood at the front with his projector smiling like he'd already won. Diane beside him, dressed for business, that professional mask firmly in place. "Grateful for the community's patience," Rick was saying. "I know there's been some confusion, some rumors, but tonight we're here to set the record straight and move forward with the Oak Street development." Murmurs of approval from the real estate crowd, the country club set, people who stood to profit. "We have final funding commitments," Rick continued, clicking to a new slide. "Financial projections, gleaming with optimism. Ground breaks June 1st, first phase completion by fall. This is happening, folks. This is growth." Tom's hands were steady on the metal evidence box in his lap. He'd measured twice. Now came the cut. "Before we proceed to the vote," Pastor Frank said, standing, "I believe Tom Whitaker has something to present to the community." Rick's smile tightened. "Frank, we've been over this. Mr. Whitaker's personal grievances aren't—" "This isn't personal," Tom said, standing. His voice carried, steady and sure. "This is about fraud." The room went silent. Tom walked to the front, Carl following with a folding table. They set up facing the crowd. Tom placed the evidence box on the table, unlocked it. The brass padlock clicked loud in the quiet. 40 years, Tom said, looking at the faces. "I've been a machinist for 40 years. My father taught me. If you want to build something that lasts, you measure, you document, you work with precision." He opened the box. "So that's what I did." He pulled out the first document, held it up. "January 12th, Eleanor Hayes drops her wallet in the church parking lot after Rick Brennan and my wife mock her for being deaf." Tom's voice stayed level. Inside this wallet, he pulled out a photocopy. A military medal. For her son, James Hayes, killed in Korea 1952, deaf since birth, like his mother. Eleanor stood, hands signing. Elena translated. "My son used to sign to me, 'Silence isn't surrender.' He refused to be invisible just because the world wouldn't learn his language. Tom Whitaker learned. That day in the parking lot, he was the only one who saw me as fully human." Tom pulled out the next document. February 1st, Eleanor Hayes, as administrator of the Hayes Land Trust, approves a historic commercial variance for Whitaker Workshop. Permit granted, recorded, legal. My property was never in danger from the zoning complaint. Rick's face had gone pale. How did you... Public record, Tom said. Same place I found this. He held up the anonymous zoning complaint. Filed January 3rd, 10 days before you approached Eleanor. Same week my wife called her about investment opportunities. He pulled out Sarah Chen's analysis. County clerk's office tracked the IP address on the electronic filing. Came from Diane Whitaker's real estate office. 9:47 a.m., January 3rd. Diane's mask cracked. That doesn't prove... It proves premeditation. Tom's voice was hard. You filed a fraudulent complaint against my workshop to create artificial pressure, to make me desperate enough to sign documents giving you control of my property. He pulled out more papers, the forged development contract, the fake partnership agreements, each one marked with Rick's perfect mechanical signatures. Rick Brennan, real name Richard Brenner, uses signature stamps. Tom pulled out his micrometer, held it up. I measured every signature on every document. Same pressure depth, same ink distribution, same angle. Perfect, too perfect. Carl stepped forward, added documents to the display. Adams County, 2018. Richard Brenner defrauds Martha Hoskins using forged property liens. Charges dropped. Porter County, 2016. Same pattern, same victim profile. Elderly, vulnerable, trusting. This is absurd, Rick said, but his voice had lost its confidence. You can't just make wild accusations. I'm not making accusations. Tom pulled out the final section. I'm presenting evidence to the State Attorney General's Fraud Division. Investigator Lydia Moss has been building a case against you for 6 months. I just gave her what she needed to make it airtight. The back door opened. A woman in a dark suit stepped in, flanked by 2 state police officers. Richard Brenner, she said, her voice carrying authority. I'm Investigator Lydia Moss, State Attorney General's office. We need you to come with us. Rick's face went white. You can't... I have rights. You do, and we'll explain them downtown. Moss nodded to the officers. They moved forward. Tom turned to the crowd, pulled out one more document. And this. A donation form claiming Eleanor Hayes gave $50,000 to Grace Community Church, used by my wife to establish credibility for their investment scheme. He held up the handwriting analysis. State Police Lab confirms this signature is Diane Whitaker's hand forging Eleanor Hayes' name. Federal tax fraud. Diane claimed this fake donation as a business deduction on her 2024 returns. Pastor Frank stood. I can confirm. The church never received this donation, and I've provided documentation to the IRS and the AG's office. Diane stared at Tom. All color drained from her face. Tom, please, we can work this out. We can... 40 years, Tom said quietly. His eyes met hers across the room. 40 years, Diane, and I would have fixed anything for you, built anything, fought anything, forgiven anything. His voice cracked. But you can't fix what was never broken in you. You were always this person. I just didn't see it. Diane's eyes filled with tears, real tears, maybe the first genuine emotion he'd seen from her in months. Mrs. Whitaker, Moss said, we'd like you to come with us as well. You have the right to remain silent. I know my rights, Diane whispered. She looked at Tom one more time. I'm sorry. You're sorry you got caught. Diane opened her mouth, closed it, had nothing to say that would matter. The officers led them out, Rick arguing, threatening lawyers, Diane silent, shoulders slumped. The fellowship hall erupted, voices overlapping, people standing, questions flying. Tom stood at the front, the evidence box open, his father's level sitting on top, the bubble perfectly centered, truth finding its level. Eleanor made her way to him, hands signing. You did it. We did it, Tom corrected. He signed back. Thank you for seeing me, for believing I was worth protecting. Eleanor smiled, sad but genuine. My son would have liked you, Tom Whitaker. Tom felt his eyes burn, didn't let the tears fall. Not yet. Pastor Frank called for order, managed to quiet the room eventually. I think it's safe to say the Oak Street development proposal is withdrawn. All in favor of closing this matter? A forest of hands. Opposed? Silence. Motion carries. Frank looked at Tom. And I think we all owe Tom Whitaker an apology, and our thanks. Scattered applause grew into something louder, real. Tom stood there, accepting it, feeling the weight of the evidence box in his hands. He'd measured twice. He'd cut once. And it had held. Mabel's diner, an hour later. Tom sat in his usual booth, the evidence box on the seat beside him, coffee going cold, pie untouched. Lydia Moss slid into the opposite bench. She looked tired but satisfied. "Hell of a case you built," she said. "Will it stick?" "Brenner's going down. 5 counties worth of fraud, elder exploitation forgery. We've got him for 10 to 15, easy." Moss pulled out a folder. "He's already trying to cut a deal, offered to testify against other fraud networks if we reduce his sentence." "And Diane?" Moss's expression softened. "That's more complicated. The tax fraud is federal, the forgery is state, but—" She paused. "She's willing to testify against Brenner, full cooperation. In exchange, the state's offering a plea deal, probation, restitution, permanent loss of real estate license, no prison time." Tom felt something twist in his chest. Relief? Disappointment? He couldn't tell. "She gets to walk?" "She gets to avoid prison. That's different from walking." Moss leaned forward. "Tom, she'll be a convicted felon. She'll lose her career, her reputation, most of her friends. And she'll spend the next 5 years on probation, one mistake away from incarceration. That's not nothing." Tom thought about the photograph in his toolbox, about 40 years, about the woman who'd laughed at Eleanor's deafness. What does she have to do to get the deal? Tell the truth, all of it, about Brenner's operation, his methods, his other victims. Help us build cases in the other counties. Moss pulled out a document. "And this, full confession, notarized, admitting to everything, the forgery, the conspiracy, the fraud. It'll be part of your divorce record." Tom took the document, read Diane's signature at the bottom. Not forged, not stamped, real, shaky, human. "She cried when she signed it," Moss said quietly. "Real tears. Maybe the first honest thing she's done in months." Tom set down the paper. "Is she sorry?" "I don't know. Maybe sorry she got caught. Maybe sorry she threw away 40 years for a real estate deal." Moss shrugged. "Does it matter?" Tom thought about it. "No, I guess it doesn't. The divorce will be finalized by June, uncontested. She's not fighting for the house or the workshop or anything, just wants it done." Moss stood. "Tom, you did good work here, precision work. You ever want a job as an investigator?" "I'm a machinist," Tom said. "That's all I know how to be." Moss smiled. "Well, you're a damn good one." After she left, Tom sat alone with his cold coffee and the evidence box. Carl appeared, sliding into the booth. "Heard Diane took a deal." "Yeah. You okay with that?" Tom looked out the window. Spring twilight, everything green and growing, the smell of earth and rain and new grass. "I don't know what I am," he said honestly. "I wanted justice. I got it, but it feels empty," Carl finished. "Yeah." They sat quiet for a while. Mabel brought fresh coffee, said nothing, left them alone. "You know what I realized?" Tom said finally. "I spent 40 years thinking marriage was about building something together. But you can't build anything with someone who's always looking for a way to tear it down for scrap." "No," Carl agreed. "You can't." Tom pulled out the evidence box, ran his hand over the smooth metal. "I built this, though. Built it right. And it held. Damn right it held." Outside, the streetlights came on, warm yellow against the deepening blue. Tom thought about Eleanor, about her son James, who'd signed "Silence Isn't Surrender," about Pastor Frank's words, "The measure of a man is whether he stands back up." He'd fallen, he'd stood, and he'd built something that lasted. "Come on," Carl said. "Let's get you home." Tom picked up the evidence box. It felt lighter now. Job done. Purpose served. As they walked out, Mabel called after them. "Tom, you did right. Don't let anybody tell you different." Tom nodded. Couldn't speak past the tightness in his throat. Outside, the spring air smelled like hope. May arrived gentle, not loud, not dramatic, just persistent warmth after the long cold. The kind of spring that made you believe in second chances. Mabel's Diner, 8 a.m. on a Thursday. Tom sat in his booth, it was his booth now, everyone knew it, reading the newspaper. The coffee was hot, the pie fresh, and the headline on page 3 made something settle in his chest. "Developer sentenced to 12 years in elder fraud case." Below it, smaller, "Local woman pleads guilty, sentenced to probation." Tom read the article twice. Richard Brenner, had refused the plea deal at the last minute, tried to fight it in court. The jury took 40 minutes to convict, 12 years federal prison, restitution to 5 victims across 3 counties. Asset forfeiture, everything. Diane's case was 2 paragraphs at the end. Guilty plea accepted, 5 years probation, $50,000 restitution to Eleanor Hayes, permanent revocation of real estate license, mandatory financial counseling. The judge's statement: Mrs. Whitaker showed remorse and cooperation. The court believes rehabilitation is possible. Tom folded the newspaper, set it aside. Carl slid into the opposite bench carrying 2 plates, eggs, bacon, toast. He pushed one toward Tom. You eat yet? Not hungry. Eat anyway. Carl salted his eggs. Eleanor called. Wants to see you at the workshop this afternoon. About what? Business. The good kind. Carl grinned. Also, Frank's setting up an ASL class at church, starting next week. 12 people signed up. Eleanor's teaching. Tom felt something warm in his chest. That's good. Mabel's learning too. Says she's tired of writing orders for the deaf trucker who comes through Tuesdays. Carl chewed toast. World's changing, Tom. Slowly, but it's changing. They ate in comfortable silence. The diner filled with morning regulars, farmers arguing about corn prices, Joe from the hardware store reading the sports section. Normal life, rolling forward like it always did. Mabel refilled their coffee without asking. Heard from Diane? Tom shook his head. Good. Woman's got some soul-searching to do. Don't need you getting soft and forgiving before she's earned it. Mabel patted his shoulder. You did right, Tom. World needs more men who stand up when it matters. After she walked away, Carl said quietly, You okay? Really? Tom thought about it. I'm tired, sad, relieved, angry, grateful. He looked up. All of it at once. Guess that's normal. Guess so. But yeah, I'm okay. Tom meant it. I'm going to be okay. The workshop looked different with the bay door open and spring sunlight pouring in. Tom had spent the morning cleaning, really cleaning, not just pushing dirt around. Fresh paint on the walls, tools reorganized, the old coffee pot replaced with one that didn't burn everything. His father's workbench, sanded and refinished, gleamed in the light. Eleanor arrived at 2 p.m. in a pickup truck that made Tom blink. Not a luxury sedan, a working truck, diesel, built for hauling. She climbed out carefully, but the cane was gone. Surprised? She signed, grinning. A little. Bought it yesterday. Figured if I'm investing in a restoration business, I should understand the tools. Eleanor moved into the workshop, running her hand along the workbench. Beautiful work. Your father built this? In 1968. Taught me everything on this bench. Eleanor pulled a rolled paper from her truck, spread it on the workbench. Architectural plans. Whitaker and Hayes Restoration, she signed, pointing. Bay expansion here, parts storage here, office space with proper accessibility, ramps, visual fire alarms, the works. Her hands moved excitedly. We break ground next month. Open by August. Tom studied the plans. Professional, thoughtful, real. Eleanor, this is I can't afford. Investment, not charity. Eleanor pulled out contracts. I'm putting in $200,000. You're putting in sweat equity and expertise. We split profits 60-40, your favor. After 5 years, you can buy me out if you want, or we stay partners. Your choice. Tom looked at the contracts. Fair terms, clear language, nothing hidden. Why me? Eleanor's expression softened. Because you stopped when an old woman needed help. Because you built a case with the precision of someone who cares about truth. Because my son would have liked you. She paused. And because this county needs people who fix things instead of tearing them down for profit. Tom felt his eyes burn. He extended his hand. Eleanor shook it. Firm grip, partnership grip. One condition, Tom signed. What's that? You teach me more ASL, properly, not just the basics. Eleanor's smile was brilliant. Deal. Starting tonight, I'm teaching that church class. You should come. I will. Eleanor gathered the plans, headed for her truck, paused at the door. Tom, your ex-wife, have you forgiven her? Tom thought about the photograph. His toolbox. About 40 years. About the woman at the sentencing who'd cried real tears. No, he said honestly. Not yet, maybe not ever. But I'm not carrying her anymore. That's something. Eleanor nodded. That's everything. After she left, Tom stood in the workshop alone. Spring breeze through the open door brought the smell of cut grass and warm earth and possibility. His phone buzzed, a text from Carl. Wednesday poker night? Joe's bringing beer. Tom smiled, typed back, I'll bring pie from Mabel's. He looked around the workshop. His father's bench, refinished. His tools, organized. The empty space where the evidence box used to sit, now just clean metal, waiting for new work. The building permit hung on the wall, framed, official, permanent. Whitaker Workshop, LLC. Historic Commercial Variance, approved. February 1st, 2025. Tom ran his hand over the workbench, felt the smooth wood, still solid after 57 years. Some things, built right, lasted forever. Outside, a cardinal sang. The sound of spring, full and clear. Tom pulled out his father's level, set it on the bench. The bubble sat perfect center, perfectly true. He thought about Eleanor's son, about James Park, the Korean War vet, about silence and surrender in the language of helping people who needed it, about building things that mattered, about measuring twice and cutting once and standing back up when you fell. The workshop smelled like fresh paint and motor oil and coffee that didn't burn. Tom picked up a wrench. Mrs. Henderson's tractor needed work. The widow's furnace was making funny noises. Joe's son had a lawnmower that wouldn't start. Work to be done, honest work. He fired up the space heater, even though he didn't need it, just like the sound, the hum of purpose. Through the open bay door, Tom could see green grass, blue sky, the oak tree his father had planted in 1970, massive now, leaves full and bright. Spring had come, and Tom Whitaker was still standing. May came gentle that year, not loud, not showy, just persistent, the way good things tend to arrive when you stop forcing them. The workshop smelled like it always had. Motor oil, sawdust, fresh coffee that didn't taste like rust anymore. But something was different. The tools felt lighter in my hands, like they knew they were building something that mattered again. Eleanor stopped by most Wednesdays. We'd work on small engines, her learning, me teaching, and sometimes we'd just sit in the spring sun, signing about nothing important. Her son James would have been 73 that May. She said I reminded her of him, the stubborn way I measured things, the refusal to leave a job half done. Diane wrote once from whatever town she'd moved to after her probation started. The letter sat unopened on my bench for a week. When I finally read it, all I felt was tired. She was sorry. Sorry for herself, mostly. Sorry she got caught. Sorry she threw away 40 years. That's different from being sorry for what you did. I never wrote back. Some things you can't fix. Even with the best tools. Carl and I partnered up, official by summer, Whitaker and Hayes Restoration. Good work, honest prices, no fancy promises. Turns out there's a lot of broken things in this world that just need someone to care enough to fix them right. Pastor Frank says that's the lesson in all of it. We're all a little broken, and we're all capable of breaking each other. The question is, what you do when you see someone hurting. Do you mock them for not hearing your words, or do you learn their language and listen? I think about that cold January morning sometimes, how close I came to just driving past, minding my own business. How easy it would have been to let Diane and Rick have their way. But Eleanor's hands were moving, signing help, and I knew the language. Sometimes that's all it takes, someone who knows the language of pain and decides to answer. The church ASL class meets Thursday nights now. 15 people, all ages. Eleanor teaching, me helping. We practice signs for truth and justice and friend. But the one we keep coming back to, the one Eleanor's son used to sign to her, is simple. Silence isn't surrender. 3 words, but they mean everything. Spring always comes, even after the longest winter. You just got to survive the cold first. Keep your tools sharp, keep your hands working, keep building things that matter, even when people tell you it's not worth the effort. My father used to say, a good weld holds under pressure. So should a man's word, so should his work. I built the evidence box right. It held when it mattered. And now I'm building other things. A business, friendships, a life that's mine, not borrowed, not stolen, not built on somebody else's lies. The workshop's warmer these days, not just from the space heater, but from the people who stop by. Carl with coffee, Mabel with pie, Eleanor with her quiet grace and sharp business sense, Pastor Frank checking on my soul, Joe bringing hardware I didn't ask for but somehow always need. Turns out you don't have to be loud to matter. You don't have to be perfect to be valuable. You just have to show up, do the work, stand up when it counts. And maybe, if you're lucky, learn to sign thank you to an old woman who saw something worth protecting in a grease-stained machinist nobody else noticed. Spring came. I'm still standing. And the level on my father's bench still reads true.